Chosen one, there was a time when I thought becoming chosen would feel like being lifted, like being surrounded by light, like doors opening and voices affirming that I was finally seen, finally understood, finally rewarded. I thought it would feel like gaining something powerful, something visible, something undeniable. But what no one tells you is that becoming chosen doesn't begin with what you receive, it begins with what you lose. And the first thing I lost was the version of myself that needed approval to breathe. I used to shape my words so people would stay, shape my silence so no one would feel uncomfortable, shape my dreams so they wouldn't seem too big or too strange. But the path of being chosen slowly stripped that away. It placed me in moments where pleasing everyone meant betraying myself, and over time, I had to decide which loss hurt more, losing people or losing my truth. And so I lost the habit of shrinking. I lost the comfort of blending in. I lost the safety of being easily understood. Then I lost certainty, the illusion that life would unfold in predictable ways if I just followed the rules. I lost timelines I once clung to like lifelines, plans dissolved, expectations collapsed. The future I once described so confidently became something I could no longer see clearly. And standing in that uncertainty felt like standing in an open field during a storm with nowhere to hide. But what I didn't realize then was that certainty had been a cage disguised as stability. When it fell apart, it didn't destroy me. It revealed how much of my life had been built on fear of the unknown. I also lost relationships I thought would last forever. Some people drifted quietly, like tides pulling away from the shore. Others left suddenly, like doors slammed shut without warning. At first, I tried to understand what I had done wrong. I replayed conversations, searched for mistakes, questioned my worth. But eventually I realized something painful and freeing at the same time. Not everyone is meant to walk beside you when you begin to change. Some connections survive comfort, but not transformation. And becoming chosen is nothing if not transformation. So I lost people who only loved the version of me that stayed the same. I lost conversations that revolved around distraction instead of depth. I lost the feeling of being surrounded, even when I was no longer truly seen. Loneliness became a familiar companion, not the kind that comes from being physically alone, but the kind that comes from evolving internally while the world around you remains unchanged. I lost the ability to pretend things didn't matter when they did. I lost tolerance for superficiality. I lost interest in noise that once filled my days. Silence became louder, heavier, more revealing. And in that silence, I began losing illusions I didn't even know I carried. Illusions about control, illusions about fairness, illusions about how effort always guarantees reward. I watched situations where I gave my best still fall apart. I watched sincerity misunderstood. I watched patience mistaken for weakness. And each time, something inside me broke, but something else sharpened. I began to see reality more clearly, without the comforting filters I once relied on. Another thing I lost was emotional numbness. Before this path, I could ignore what I felt. I could bury pain under routine, distraction, or denial, but becoming chosen made feeling unavoidable. Emotions surfaced with intensity I had never known. Grief, even for things I never fully possessed. Anger, even when I tried to stay calm. Longing, even when I told myself to move on. I lost the ability to run from my inner world. I had to face it, sit with it, listen to it. And that confrontation was not gentle. It demanded honesty so deep it felt like exposure. I lost pride too, the kind that refuses help, the kind that pretends strength means never breaking. There were moments I collapsed internally, moments when I realized resilience isn't the absence of struggle, but the willingness to continue while carrying it. I lost the belief that strength looks impressive. Real strength is often quiet, often invisible, often misunderstood. I also lost the need to be constantly understood by others. At first, that loss felt unbearable. Being misunderstood feels like speaking a language no one else hears. But slowly, I realized understanding from within carries a different kind of peace. I no longer needed constant validation to confirm my direction. I no longer needed agreement to confirm my worth. I lost urgency, the restless need to rush toward outcomes. Patience replaced it, but not the easy kind. The kind that stretches you, tests you, forces you to exist in unfinished spaces. I lost the version of success that could be measured by external proof alone. Recognition became less important than alignment. Applause became less meaningful than authenticity. And then there was the loss that changed everything. I lost who I thought I was. The identity built from roles, expectations, labels, and survival strategies slowly dissolved. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers, like peeling paint from an old wall. Each layer revealed something unfamiliar beneath it. Without those layers, I felt exposed, undefined, uncertain of how to introduce myself even to my own reflection. But in that loss, something else emerged, something quieter, deeper, more stable than any identity I had performed before. I lost comfort in familiar suffering. That may sound strange, but pain you know can feel safer than change you don't. Letting go of patterns that once defined me felt like stepping into unfamiliar air, unsure if I could breathe there. I lost excuses that once protected me from growth. I lost the stories I told myself to avoid responsibility for my own evolution. I lost the belief that becoming chosen meant becoming special in the eyes of others. Instead, I discovered it meant becoming accountable to something greater within myself, and perhaps the hardest loss of all, I lost the illusion that this path would ever become easy. Becoming chosen is not a destination where struggle disappears. It is a continuous unfolding where awareness deepens. It means seeing more, feeling more, understanding more, and carrying that awareness with grace even when it feels heavy. But here is the truth hidden beneath every loss. None of it was taken to leave me empty. Everything was removed to make space. Space for clarity where confusion once lived. Space for authenticity where performance once existed. Space for purpose where distraction once dominated. I didn't lose to be diminished. I lost to be refined. And even now, the process continues. There are still attachments loosening, still illusions dissolving, still parts of me learning how to stand without what once felt essential. Becoming chosen is not about what you gain in the eyes of the world. It is about what you are willing to release so your soul can finally breathe without constraint. And if you ask me what I lost to become chosen, I will tell you this: I lost everything that was never truly aligned with who I was meant to become. And though the losing felt like breaking, like unraveling, like standing alone in unfamiliar silence, it was also the beginning of the most honest life I have ever lived. After everything I lost, I expected the silence to finally give me answers. I thought once the noise faded, once the distractions disappeared, once the people and patterns that once defined me were gone, clarity would arrive like sunlight breaking through clouds. But that's not what happened. What came instead was a deeper kind of quiet, the kind doesn't comfort you at first, the kind that feels unfamiliar, almost unsettling, because you are no longer surrounded by the things that once helped you escape yourself. And in that quiet, I realized something that changed me even more than everything I had already lost. I was now face to face with who I was becoming, and I didn't fully recognize that person yet. There is a strange in-between space that comes after loss but before renewal. It is not the chaos of breaking, but it is not the peace of arrival either. It is a waiting room for transformation. A place where nothing feels fully formed, where direction feels blurred, where you sense movement within yourself but cannot yet describe what is changing. And this space is uncomfortable because it asks you to exist without clear identity, without familiar certainty, without the emotional anchors that once held you steady. I had to learn how to exist without constantly defining myself by what I had been. At first, I tried to rebuild quickly. I thought healing meant replacing everything I had lost: new goals, new habits, new connections, new structure. But every time I tried to rush forward, something inside resisted. It felt forced, unnatural, incomplete. That's when I realized becoming chosen is not about rebuilding fast. It is about allowing reconstruction to happen slowly, intentionally, and honestly. You cannot rebuild your life with the same unconscious patterns that once shaped it. You cannot rush clarity into existence. You cannot force meaning to appear before you are ready to understand it. So instead of rebuilding, I began observing. I watched my thoughts more closely. I noticed how often I reached for distraction when discomfort appeared. I noticed how easily fear disguised itself as logic. I noticed how deeply old conditioning still lived inside me, even after everything I thought I had released. Loss removes external attachments, but internal patterns take longer to unravel, and that unraveling requires patience that feels almost unbearable at times. There were days when I missed my old life, not because it was better, but because it was familiar. Familiar pain is predictable. Familiar confusion feels manageable. But growth places you in emotional territory with no map. There were moments I questioned whether losing so much had truly been necessary. Moments when I wondered if becoming chosen was simply another way of saying becoming isolated. Moments when the weight of self-awareness felt heavier than the comfort of unconscious living ever did. But slowly, something began shifting. Not dramatically, not suddenly, quietly, subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, I began noticing how my reactions were changing. Situations that once triggered immediate emotional storms now created space for reflection. Words that once wounded deeply now passed through me with less resistance. I wasn't becoming numb, I was becoming grounded. There is a difference. Numbness avoids feeling. Groundedness allows feeling without being consumed by it. I also began noticing my intuition strengthening. Before, I often doubted my inner voice. I questioned my instincts. I looked outward for confirmation before trusting inward knowing. But after losing so much external guidance, something inside me grew louder. Not louder in volume, but clearer in presence. It didn't argue, it didn't rush, it simply knew. And learning to trust that quiet knowing became one of the most transformative parts of this journey. Another unexpected change was how I began to see time differently. Before, time felt like something chasing me, something I needed to manage, control, optimize. But in this phase of becoming, time felt more like something unfolding, not something I had to outrun, but something I had to move with. Growth has its own rhythm. Healing has its own pace. Becoming cannot be accelerated without distortion. And then there was the emotional weight of awareness. Seeing patterns clearly in myself, in others, in life, brought both peace and sadness. Peace because confusion fades when clarity arrives. Sadness because awareness removes comforting illusions. I began seeing how often people operate from fear without realizing it. How often love is confused with attachment. How often silence hides truth. How often distraction replaces purpose. And sometimes, seeing so clearly felt lonely, because not everyone is ready to see what you see when you begin to awaken internally. But with that awareness also came compassion. Not the kind that excuses harm, but the kind that understands human complexity. I stopped expecting perfection from myself and from others. I stopped expecting life to be fair in ways that matched my personal sense of order. I stopped expecting growth to feel rewarding in obvious ways. Instead, I began accepting that transformation is often invisible while it is happening. One of the deepest changes was learning how to be present without needing constant stimulation. Before, stillness felt empty. Now, stillness felt full of observation, full of subtle realization, full of connection to something deeper than surface experience. I learned that peace is not the absence of activity, it is the absence of internal resistance. And yet, even with all this growth, there were still waves of doubt. Becoming chosen does not eliminate struggle, it changes your relationship with it. Doubt still appeared, but it no longer controlled me the same way. Fear still surfaced, but it no longer dictated my direction. Pain still existed, but it no longer defined my identity. I began understanding that loss was never the final stage. It was preparation, a clearing, a dismantling of everything unstable so something stronger could be built. But strength, I learned, is not hardness. It is flexibility without collapse. It is depth without heaviness. It is clarity without rigidity. And perhaps the most surprising realization of all, I began to feel gratitude for things I once resented losing. Not because the loss itself was easy, but because I could now see what those losses made possible. They created space for self-respect where self-abandonment once lived. They created space for discernment where blind trust once existed. They created space for purpose where mere survival once dominated. Becoming chosen did not make life easier. It made life more real, more honest, more intentional, more aligned. And in that alignment, something inside me finally began to feel steady, not because everything was certain, but because I no longer needed certainty to feel secure. I had learned how to stand within myself, even when everything around me remained in motion. This stage of the journey is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is not something others easily notice. But internally it is profound. It is the slow formation of a self that is no longer built from fear, approval, or avoidance. It is the emergence of a presence that does not need to prove its worth, because it finally understands it. I once believed becoming chosen meant being set apart in a way others could see. Now I understand it means becoming aligned in a way only you can feel. And that feeling, quiet, steady, deeply rooted, is something no loss can ever take away again. There comes a moment in this journey when you realize that becoming chosen is not just about what you lost, and it is not just about who you are slowly becoming, it is about what you must now carry. Loss empties you, transformation reshapes you, but purpose fills you with responsibility. And responsibility is heavier than anything you released before. For a long time, I thought the hardest part was letting go. I thought the pain of losing people, identities, comforts, and illusions was the peak of the journey. But I was wrong. Letting go was only preparation. The real weight arrived when I understood that everything I had been stripped of was making space for something that required more from me than I had ever given before. Awareness, discipline, integrity, and courage that could not be turned off when things became uncomfortable. Because once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. Once you understand deeply, you cannot pretend you don't know. Once you awaken internally, you cannot go back to living unconsciously without feeling a constant inner resistance. And that is when I realized that becoming chosen means living with heightened awareness in a world that often functions on autopilot. I began noticing how different everyday experiences felt. Conversations that once seemed normal now revealed hidden tensions, unspoken fears, and emotional undercurrents most people ignored. Decisions that once felt simple now carried layers of meaning. Even silence changed. It was no longer empty space, but information, presence, energy. Awareness made everything more vivid, but also more demanding. Because awareness asks you to respond differently. You cannot react impulsively when you understand consequences more deeply. You cannot engage in superficial behavior when you see the emotional cost beneath it. You cannot lie to yourself when self-deception becomes visible in real time. Awareness removes the comfort of ignorance, and ignorance, I learned, had once made life feel lighter because it required less responsibility. Now everything required intention. How I spoke, how I listened, how I responded to frustration, how I treated people who could offer me nothing in return, how I treated myself when no one was watching. Integrity was no longer an abstract idea, it became a daily practice, a constant alignment between what I knew internally and how I acted externally. And alignment is exhausting when you first begin living it, because it demands consistency even when no one is rewarding you for it. There were moments when I understood why people choose numbness, why distraction feels easier, why avoidance becomes a lifestyle. Living consciously means feeling the weight of your choices more fully. It means recognizing when you are acting from fear instead of truth. It means admitting when you are tempted to shrink, to compromise, to betray your own growth, just to feel comfortable again. And comfort began to feel different too. Before, comfort meant familiarity, ease, predictability. Now comfort became something quieter, the absence of internal conflict. Even when situations were difficult, if I remained aligned with what I knew was right, there was a strange steadiness inside me. But when I acted against that alignment, even small compromises created deep unrest. This is the hidden discipline of becoming chosen. You are no longer guided primarily by external consequences, but by internal coherence. Your inner world becomes your compass, and ignoring it becomes harder than facing discomfort. Another realization emerged slowly but powerfully. Being chosen does not mean being elevated above others. It means being entrusted with awareness that must be used with humility. Awareness without humility becomes arrogance. Insight without compassion becomes judgment. Clarity without patience becomes isolation. So I had to learn how to see without condemning, how to understand without assuming superiority, how to grow without disconnecting from humanity. This was harder than I expected, because when you begin to change deeply, you start noticing the difference between where you are and where others are in their awareness. And that difference can create distance. If you are not careful, it is easy to withdraw, to feel misunderstood, to assume no one else could possibly relate to what you are experiencing internally. But that too is part of the test, learning to remain open, connected and compassionate even when your path feels solitary. Learning to walk your journey without expecting others to validate it. Learning to respect different stages of growth without needing everyone to see what you see. And perhaps one of the most difficult responsibilities of all, learning when to remain silent. Not every realization needs to be spoken. Not every truth needs to be shared. Not every insight will be understood by those who are not ready to hear it. Early in my journey, I felt an urge to explain everything, to express what I was discovering, to articulate the changes happening within me. But over time, I learned that some growth is meant to be lived, not announced. Silence became a form of strength, not suppression, restraint. A calm understanding that truth does not lose power simply because it is not spoken aloud. With responsibility also came a deeper relationship with discipline. Not forced discipline, not rigid control, but conscious commitment. Becoming chosen requires consistency when motivation fades. It requires showing up for your growth even when progress feels invisible. It requires choosing long-term alignment over short-term relief again and again and again. And sometimes that repetition feels lonely, because much of this work happens internally, unseen by others. No applause, no recognition, no external proof that what you are doing matters, just quiet persistence. But something profound begins to develop in that persistence: self-trust. Not confidence based on success, but trust built from integrity. Trust that you will not abandon your growth when it becomes inconvenient. Trust that you will face what needs to be faced. Trust that you will remain honest with yourself even when that honesty is uncomfortable. And self-trust changes everything. It stabilizes you in uncertainty. It grounds you in difficulty. It gives you strength that does not depend on circumstances. Another unexpected responsibility was emotional depth. Becoming chosen did not make me detached from the world, it made me more sensitive to it. I felt more empathy, more awareness of suffering, more recognition of how deeply interconnected human experiences are. And that sensitivity required balance, because feeling everything intensely can overwhelm you if you do not learn how to remain centered within it. So I learned the difference between compassion and emotional absorption. Compassion allows you to care without losing yourself. Absorption makes you carry what was never yours to hold. Boundaries became an essential part of this path, not walls to keep others out, but structures to preserve clarity and stability. I also began understanding that purpose is not always dramatic. Sometimes purpose is simply presence, showing up fully, living authentically with integrity in ordinary moments. Not every calling announces itself with grand signs. Sometimes purpose is revealed through how consistently you embody truth in small, quiet ways. And yet, despite all this growth, there were still moments when I wished for my old simplicity. Moments when awareness felt heavy. Moments when responsibility felt endless. Moments when I wondered if I would ever feel completely at rest again. But then I realized something essential. Rest is not the absence of responsibility. Rest is harmony within it. When you stop resisting who you are becoming, even the weight you carry begins to feel natural. Not easy, but right. This is the stage where becoming chosen stops feeling like something happening to you and starts feeling like something being lived through you. Your life becomes less about personal gain and more about alignment with something deeper, something steady, guiding, quiet but unmistakable. And in that alignment, you begin to understand that everything you lost, everything you endured, everything you rebuilt was not just for transformation. It was preparation to hold awareness without fear, responsibility without resentment, and purpose without needing recognition. This is the hidden center of the journey, not loss, not awakening, but embodiment. Becoming what you were shaped to be fully, consciously, and without turning away from the weight or the beauty of it.